Hello you beautiful people, Wolf here. I hope you liked Stan's book review, but now I'm back again with some plastic goodness. Last time we finished painting the little Hetzer, so now it's time to weather it in a semi-decent manner at least. I'm starting with an easy technique to get the creative juices flowing. The dark wash is an excellent tool to highlight surface details on any model, especially the homemade weld seams for example. I like to use AK's dark brown wash for green colors, but don't let the name fool you, it's more than good for different darker colors as well. The whole idea behind a panel liner or dark wash is to make the raised detail pop by making the surrounding areas darker. It is important to select the right tone of course, but for my usual suspects, like German and Soviet tanks, this bottle of dark brown is perfectly enough. For lighter camo schemes I'd have to use lighter wash though, but I'll touch that when the time has come for me to reform myself with different kits. Application is really easy, but a coat of semi-gloss varnish is needed. I use a number 1 brush for application and let the wash dry completely to the touch. Removing the excess amount of wash is easy peasy as well. The varnished surface makes it a walk in the park, since the wash can't really grip into the surface if it's not matte anymore. The same number 1 brush is used, but this time instead of a wash, it's filled with odorless thinner from my local crafts shop. Just be careful only to touch up surfaces you want to clean up, the thinner picks up wash easily. Next up, more tetanus. Rust effects are a cool method to make any tank look more worn and torn. One just has to be careful not to overdo the effect, since most operational tanks weren't beaten to death and had paint coats reapplied even in field conditions. I like to follow previously chipped parts, but only on chips that are deep, meaning I have to follow the darker ones. I'm applying standard dust effects by MIG Productions with the number 1 brush and let them dry for a few minutes. On horizontal surfaces I only touch the rust up with a damp brush and odorless thinner until I get the rust effect I like. For vertical streaks it's the same, but instead of stippling the brush, I pull it down for the rust wash to create streaks. You can use the same technique with dusty colored oil paints for rain streak marks, but I will tackle this differently for this model. Throwing mud at a model must be the most fun part of any build, at least it's for me. It must be triggering my inner child or my lizard brain, but I just like putting dirt on a tank. Of course I need to keep in mind that the wheels and tracks must fit once I'm done. Therefore I'm only applying a small amount of acrylic mud on the Hetzer, and I'm using AK's Dark Earth from the Terrain series. The color is not important in this case, as I'm only applying it for the texture. For easier application I thinned it down with some tap water. The hard edge of the brown pigment is nothing to worry about, but it's worth blending the paste further with a wet brush. For the horizontal surfaces I like to add earth and dirt from the garden, but only the pieces that are in scale. I also mix in some static grass and small root fragments from plants. This not only simulates dirt, but is dirt. Nothing's better than the real stuff I guess. A dry brush is used to sort the material's placement and how much of it I want on the tank. To fix this whole mess I simply apply AK's gravel and sand fixer with a pipette, since a brush would rearrange the dirt that I carefully placed. Now that all the dirt and matte texture is fixed in place, it's time to prepare the whole tank for the dust treatment. Since I don't want dust everywhere, I spray a layer of hairspray on the tank. This will act as a chipping fluid and basically it's the same thing as applying a faint winter whitewash, only this time it's dust. The dust color itself is a totally ordinary sand tone from AK's rear color line, only this time thinned down to it almost being a wash. This way it was easily applied by an airbrush. For the lower hole I just spammed it with a high flow setting to get full coverage on the matte texture applied earlier. The dirt on the fenders had to be done more carefully since any overspray can be corrected, but I didn't want harsh lines so the chipping fluid won't help much. For vertical dusting it was important to use small motions that made a lot of delicate lines on the upper hull to simulate rain streaks. Here I turned the pressure on the airbrush down to an absolute minimum to let paint through without sputtering. To really drive the whole thing home, I started creating streak marks with a wet brush using vertical strokes. The paint started lifting slowly, creating an effect like when dust gets slowly washed away in streaks by rain. Any overspray could also be removed from the upper hull this way. If you remove too much, a second layer of the highly diluted sand tone will fix it. The whole matte color needed a darker tone, so I simply brushed loose ground and enamel texture paint from Ammo by Mig. This significantly made it darker and also took 3 days to dry up and still had a wet shimmer, which was totally not what I wanted, but mistakes happen and I probably used it in an incorrect way. Anyway, after it finally dried up, I could create some contrast on the mud and dirt. This is exactly the same step as adding a dark wash on the tank itself, only this time I used interior streaking effect from AK instead of the dark brown, as it would have been too dark and out of place. I needed to apply it in 3 passes to get the contrast I wanted, but it did its job really well. Excess was once again removed with odorless thinner to create a transition that looked natural. As for darker matte streaks, the dark brown wash used for the panel lining was good enough for this case, so I did exactly that and blended the effect with, say it after me, odorless thinner. The tracks gave me the most headaches, as the tiny links made me almost go with the dust-only approach for weathering, but given that I really want to build a diorama, I just sat down and figured it out. Of course, I had to start with the basic number 1 weathering effect, rust. In order to make the tracks look rusty, I created a heavy wash from the Light Color Rust set. I mixed it in a large pot to have at least 3 tonal variations, because tracks won't rust in only one tone. The high pigment count of the paints helps a lot, as it will dry up totally matte and I can mix it to a wash without losing too much coverage. After I smeared this mixture on both tracks, I used a hairdryer on the cold setting to speed up the drying time. Once that was done, I used the interior streaking effect to create the contrast on the mud on the wheels, as I forgot to do that step when I did the hull. Then I put dark earth mud mixture from AK between the tracks, being really careful not to smear it everywhere on the tracks. I also thinned the mixture by tap water a bit to have more control over the application. Every now and then I used my finger to remove mud paste that overlapped tracks. Once the mud paste dried, I applied a heavy layer of dry earth splash effects from Ammo by Mig. It dries up in a nice matte finish, giving the illusion of settled and dried up dust on the tracks. Interior streak wash was applied to make the mud pop, giving it the contrast it deserves. The same principle applies as with the mud on the hull. If you think it's not enough, use another layer. Only difference is that this time I didn't blend it with the odorless thinner and only slapped it over the middle part of the tracks, not to cover the light dust effect created before. Once I finished up the dirt and mud on the tracks and wheels, I painted the contact points of the tracks in Vallejo's gunmetal. Those parts usually get constantly worn down and polished by the roads and surroundings of the vehicles, making them shine in their natural metal color. This was the reason I wiped down excess mud from the tracks. To create another sort of contrast, I used a soft pencil to create freshly worn steel marks on the rims of the wheels where the tracks would get in contact with them. Graphite dust can also be used to further polish the tracks, but I felt the gunmetal paint did an okay job, and if the need arises, I still can do so later. Attaching the running gear to the hull was an easy task. A few specks of CA glue to the attachment points is enough to hold them in place and finally finish the model. The same procedure was done with the side skirts. For the last few details, I created a bit of shrubbery with some roots and AK's beech foliage summer. The branches aren't even glued in place yet, the cable holds them perfectly fine, and I still have to build the diorama, so things can still be changed. Some last mud stains were speckled on with the brush to stimulate dirt that got spat on the tank from the ground. The next step is to finish up these gentlemen here, but that's going to be done in the next video. That's all for today. I hope you learned something today, or at least enjoyed watching the video. Here's a look at the finished model. I like how it turned out. It's a relatively simple design, yet has some interesting details, and buying the kit is highly recommended, if not for anything else, for the Hetzer meme alone. If you like this video, write to us and look up our other stuff on the shown outlets. Thanks for watching and keep us in your sights.